This video is about the principles of design. We have talked previously about the elements of art, and now I'm going to talk about the principles of design. So the principles of design, just like principles of leadership, principles is a word that means rules. So the principles of design are the guidelines or the loose rules for using the elements of art. If elements of art are what makes up art, the building blocks of art, then we need to know how to use them. So this video will explain a little bit more about how to use the elements of art. Balance is our first principle of design. So balance means arranging the elements so that no one part has more visual weight. An example of this, we've got symmetrical balance, asymmetrical balance, and then we have radial balance. So symmetrical balance is, you guys have heard the word symmetry before in math class probably. There's certain artworks that may not be 100% symmetrical, but pretty close. And this fresco by Diego Rivera is pretty close to symmetrical balance. There's mirrored on each side, it's pretty equal on both sides. Same image. Over here we have this ballet painting by Edgar Degas, and even though it's not the same on both sides, like a symmetrical balance, it's still balanced. There's still something going on each side. We still have blue here and blue here. It still looks like it goes together, but it's different on each side. It almost looks like there's more going on over here, but it's still balanced equally. Radial balance is like, think of it like radial, like circle, like radius. We're using lots of math words in art today, but radial balance is when the balance radiates out of a central point, and it's often symmetrical top to bottom and left to right. So it's super symmetrical because if I were to cut it in half this way or this way, it would be symmetrical both ways. This is the rose window at the Notre Dame Cathedral, or Notre Dame Chartres. This is stained glass. It's beautiful. But see how it's sort of formulated into a circle. We could cut it either which way and it would be completely symmetrical and perfectly balanced. And that is radial balance. Our second principle of design that we're going to talk about is emphasis. I love emphasis. Emphasis is something that I talk about a lot in fine art and in drawing and design, because for me, when you're creating art or when you're analyzing art, I want you to be able to tell me, what's the star of the show? What do you think the artist really wants you to look at? And if you wanted to guess at what the artist wanted you to look at in this painting, it would probably be her face, right? Her face really stands out. There's still balance, there's still harmony, there's still a color scheme that's pretty obvious, gold, right? But the first thing I notice is her face, because everything else is gold. So the artist is really trying to show you that that's the star of this show. And if you want to know more about this painting, definitely Google it because it's very, very, very interesting. Variety is our next principle of design. That's kind of combining a couple different things to create more interest. So that's combining like texture. So maybe you might have a smooth texture or a rough texture. You might have lines and shapes. You might have different color schemes. So in the elements of art video, we talked about different color schemes and how they can go together. So complementary colors, analogous colors. Variety is using more than one element of art that maybe contrasts to create some interest. You don't want something that's all the same thing. That would be boring. Unless you're trying to do it on purpose. So this is kind of a principle. The principles of design are not hard and fast rules, they're just guidelines. If you're trying to create variety, then there's lots of different ways that you can think about that. Contrast. I also love contrast. I think with drawing and with painting, a lot of you are afraid of contrast. I actually say to drawing students all the time that I think you're afraid of the dark. Because creating shadow, creating contrast. Contrast is the amount of difference within an element. So it could be contrast with colors, it could be contrast with the value, It could be contrast with textures. For this right here, you can see this painting, Girl with a Pearl Earring, and it's not Rembrandt, it's Vermeer, but that's okay. This painting has really, 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 really dark darks and really, 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 really light colors. It's the incredible difference between the two that creates this sense of wonder, this really, really beautiful painting that's really popping out, right? You can see that it's a completely black background, but then you've got these really bright lights on her. And the reason that this person probably confused it with Rembrandt is Rembrandt did a lot of that too. There's a lot of that going on during the Baroque period of art. But when you're drawing, when you're painting, when you're trying to create a piece of art, contrast is really important to create emphasis. So we've got, the principles of design working together there. Rhythm. So rhythm is making a work active through repetition, so often with pattern. In some of the buildings that we talk about in fine art that have columns, that's rhythm. That's the same thing repeating over and over again. A lot of times when you're drawing, it's texture. A lot of times when you're creating anything, if you have something repeating throughout the work, then it's going to make it look more harmonious. It's going to look like it has harmony, like it goes together. And then there's movement. So there's different types of movement in art. There's compositional movement. So that is how artists create, they kind of trick you. They try to lead your eye in a certain direction. So in Van Gogh's Starry Night, it kind of leads your eye here, and then this little swirl leads your eye here, and then this light part right here will lead your eye up into the sun and back. So a lot of artists will create this compositional movement. They want you to look at certain things. They want to lead your eye all around to make sure that you're seeing the whole painting. And then there's implied movement. So just like we had in the elements of art, implied texture, implied form, there's implied movement too. So creating something that looks like it's in mid-motion. Almost like you took a picture, an action shot picture of it, but it's a painting or a photograph or a drawing. So implied movement, that the objects in the image appear to be moving. And then there's actual movement. So some kinetic art will actually move. So there's certain sculptures that will actually move when you were looking at them. Something that actually moves, if you were to create 2D art, it would be like a pop-up book or a pop-up drawing. And then we have proportion. So how parts relate to each other or the whole. So it's how big it's basically, if I were to simplify the definition there, how big or small something is compared to everything else. So for a lot of times we'll talk about in drawing and design too, facial proportion. So how big should your eyes be in comparison to your nose? How big should a person's arm be in comparison to the rest of their body? Proportion is really important. That's a lot of times it's proportion that makes things look off. Imagine if you drew a picture of somebody and they were almost as tall as their house, right? The proportion's off. Unless you were purposely trying to do that, it would look awkward. And a lot of times, if you purposely make the proportion off, it will create some interest. It will make it look interesting, such as this. You have this is an elephant on stilts. This is a painting by Salvador Dali, and you can see a giant elephant looks very small in comparison to this vast landscape. That is not what we would expect from a picture of an elephant, right? We would expect it to look big, but by making the elephant look small here, it creates some interest. So you can do proportion that makes sense. Everything's equal. You can do proportion that does not really make sense, and it might make it look more interesting. And then harmony is making things similar or blending the elements to create unity. Harmony and unity are often interchangeable. But for instance, this is Pablo Picasso's blue period. He had a period of time where he was very sad and he painted everything in shades of blue. By using the different shades of blue and green and gray here, it looks like it goes together. It has harmony. But you can see, if you're like me, at this point in the video, if you are looking at these pieces of art, these artworks, oftentimes you're able to point out more than one element or principle of art. So in this right now, I see contrast. I see colors, definitely. It's an analogous color scheme. We talked about that with the elements of art. I can see balance. I can see all these things that are working together to create this piece of art that is kind of successful. And unity. Unity and harmony are kind of saying the same thing, but using the elements and principles of art to create a sense of completeness. So there's so many things, just like we were just talking about with that Picasso, there's so many things that are working together very well to elements and principles of art that I look at and I'm saying, wow, you know, I see color, I see line. In this painting right here, the turning road, I see shape, I see balance, I see repetition with these different trees repeating throughout. It's very interesting how all the elements and principles can go together to create this sense of completeness, this this beautiful artwork. And that's the end. I want you to be using the elements and principles of art to analyze your art and then analyze the art of other people.